Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Bolo Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya 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 Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Shri Radha Shyam Sundar ki Jai Shri Radha Madhav ki Jai Shri Radha Vrindavan Chandra ki Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai Gaurnitai ki Jai Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol So, Hare Krishna and welcome to the second part of the seminar called Books Are the Basis. I don't know if you noticed, but off to my left, there's two eyes staring at me. Did you see that? There's one of them is new. One I recognize, but the other eye is new. There's also another eye staring that way, and one eye staring just at us. Four eyes right here in front of us. We live in a totally wired world. And we have no idea how many people are listening online, who the audience is, who's listening. A very different world than the old times. So we start now with books are the basis. And to start off with, we begin with a few nice quotations from Srila Prabhupada to set the mood for this section, which is on developing academic skills in children, but also at the same time spiritual devotional skills through the regular study of Srila Prabhupada's books. Okay? Now, the biggest challenge we have in this particular section is the fact that we have all had lunch just now. So we have to be particularly strong with our intelligence in order to focus on Srimad Bhagavatam here. And to inspire us, some quotations from Srila Prabhupada. He says, our students specifically, they should take care of reading Srimad Bhagavatam. We have therefore prescribed in our school, Dallas, and from the very beginning, if they begin education with Bhagavad Gita and then come to Srimad Bhagavatam and read the whole literature, then they will be more than MA, PhD. Even astronomy, astrology, politics, sociology, atomic theory, everything is there. Therefore, if we study Srimad Bhagavatam very carefully, then you get all knowledge completely. Throughout the whole world, whatever knowledge is there is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If one simply reads the Srimad Bhagavatam, his education is the topmost. If one studies Srimad Bhagavatam, he is well versed in every subject.
So this is really the core of the entire seminar, very important section of our presentation, because when we think about Srila Prabhupada himself, how he came to this country and the struggles he faced, especially in presenting Srimad Bhagavatam to us, how when he was at Radha Damodar temple, he was translating the first two cantos, and to the time when he actually brought those books in his trunk to America, and he was even trying to sell these Srimad Bhagavatam books in the ship, and then over here when he came, he inspired all his disciples to distribute them, and at one point they were so enthusiastic, they were not only distributing the first two cantos, they were also distributing all the other cantos, like ninth canto, and Prabhupada said, it's okay. If anybody reads even one line of this book, he's really made his way back to Godhead. That's how powerful these books are. So we all understand the spiritual benefits of reading Srimad Bhagavatam, we are not at that stature. Really these books are really meant for the liberated souls, but we are not at that stature. But we have to understand that Srimad Bhagavatam actually has the power to fulfill all our desires, whether material or spiritual. In other words, even if we have material desires, they can be easily fulfilled. So if we have desire for wealth, longevity, whatever, we want to win a war, or anything, you can think of, it's actually, Bhagavatam has the potency to actually fulfill everything. That's how powerful it is. And so we have so many aspirations for our children. With so many things we want them to do, excel, materially, academically. But we have to understand that actually Srimad Bhagavatam has the ability to actually fulfill those desires. In other words, how important it is to raise our children with these books. And so some of these spiritual benefits are here in this slide. We already talked a little bit about the good role models, how important good role models are for children. And Srimad Bhagavatam actually provides those good role models. We were discussing about intense peer pressure in school, the negative role models we have. So how do we counteract them by good role models? And we can easily take them from Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, one may think that these stories may be mythology, these personalities are not in front of us. So how will those stories be, how will the children really, be affected by these stories? These heroes, these spiritual heroes are not make-believe. They're real. They're real, great personalities. And when we read about them from the Srimad Bhagavatam, we actually, these stories affect us in the way that we would have people in front of us. In other words, they're non-different from actually experiencing. In other words, when we have our children read them, they actually experience those the instructions and these characters of these people. Now, children like stories. So how do you, and they have a hard time sitting down with philosophy. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is a great book because you can get the philosophy, but in the form of stories. Okay? So you get the entire philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, but in the form of wonderful stories, where children can keep on reading and at the same time, imbibing all these instructions. And as they get older, and the character of these personalities, like Dhruva and Prahlad, they actually rub on them, because as they read, they identify with these personalities, especially these child heroes. I remember when we were reading these stories, they would want to be like that. They would want to be like Dhruva and Prahlad. And actually, Prabhupada gives us that confidence that he says that so confidently that actually the children can be like Dhruva and Prahlad. It's not mythology. It's not something we cannot aim for our children, So, in fact, at one place, Prabhupada writes about, how Jiva Goswami talked about, the story of Parikshit Maharaj, how he saw the Lord in the womb of his mother, right? When he was in the womb. And how every child can actually see the Lord. Just like every child can become like Parikshit. He had so much faith in children reading these books and actually becoming great souls, So we have to take Prabhupada's, realizations as fact, not as something, that Prabhupada said, so now it's not for me, We can actually raise our children in the way that we hear about these great souls in the Bhagavatam. And then as the children get older, then they actually start to assimilate these instructions given by these great souls. So it goes in stages, before they get influenced by them, they want to imitate them, and gradually as they get older and we have discussions where we actually discuss these stories, then actually they are able to imbibe these instructions really well. So we'll go to the next one. Can we go back to this? Yeah. So, we all understand that Bhagavatam is so valuable. So the one thing that Bhagavatam, I know, as I was teaching my children, I realized is that how it takes you at the topmost level of spirituality, right? You hear about so many religions today in the world, right? They mostly go to the platform of material religion, materialistic religion, karma kanda, You go to God, you have certain needs, you get these rewards. So in other words, God is the order supplier. That's as far as most religions go. Now, our Vedic, literatures, especially Srimad Bhagavatam, pulls you up to the topmost level, very quickly. And that's what that's why Prabhupada, he wanted us to actually come to that platform, and he wanted children to actually be taught Srimad Bhagavatam in all the schools and to actually learn them throughout their life. For example, you see the story, every story practically see how it's pulling us up to the highest level. Like for example, the story of Gajendra, right? We see how, Gajendra is suffering so much, from that pain, how the crocodile has bitten him on his leg and he's suffering, and all that blood is flowing, and he's suffering for 1,000 years, and he finally gets the realization that actually his family members cannot protect him, they cannot save him, and they're all there to help him. And then the great realization comes, and he realizes, and then he starts praying, and we have those beautiful prayers of Gajendra, where he's praying not from relief from suffering, but actually complete relief from birth and death. So it's taking you from the platform of asking Krishna for, instead of relief, but complete freedom. So in every story, like a Jamal also, right? Where the Yamadutas and the Vishnudutas are talking, and Yamadutas are presenting the philosophy of material on the platform of materialistic religion, and how Vishnudutas are saying, no, there's something higher than that, and that's transcendental religion, the power of the holy name of the Lord. So in this way, every story is bringing a Dhruva story, right? It's also, Dhruva finally gives up his desire for material things. So the children, as they read these stories, it's giving them a whole perspective. It's actually putting them on the platform of purity, real purity, and that's why we want to make our children. We don't, like I said earlier, we don't want to just make them into pious children. We want to take them beyond that. We actually want to give them pure love of God, okay? Because, like I said earlier, these children are not ordinary. They are not here just to do a little bit of devotion. They are here to finish their work, right? To finish their business of material life. Next one. So when I was doing seminars, and then many parents were asking about, a curriculum, because they heard about how I based my entire curriculum on Srimad Bhagavatam. So we had two books, Srimad Bhagavatam and math, the Saxon math book. So when the results were coming out by Krishna's grace, and they were be able to be educated based on just Srila Prabhupada's books, then parents were asking for a curriculum. And I said, 18,000 verses, curriculum, where am I going to find that curriculum, We can never finish it in one lifetime. And so I started sharing with them this methodology, because once this methodology is understood, you can take every verse in the Bhagavatam, and actually it can be a curriculum, once this methodology is applied, right? So in other words, we teach them the concept, the skills of good understanding, good reasoning, critical thinking. And once we've taught them those skills, then those very skills can be applied to anything. No matter what they are studying, those very skills that we take from the Bhagavatam can be applied and so it becomes beneficial all round. This methodology is actually a methodology that's even practiced even today. It's a methodology that was practiced in Vedic times, where all the sages of Namasharanya, they were sitting and, talking. They were asking questions. There was a discussion between them and Shaunaka Rishi. So the whole Bhagavatam was in the form of discussion, right? The conversation between Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj was a conversation. So we see how this methodology of reading and discussion is so valuable, and even in modern times, it's tried in all the major powerful universities like Cambridge and Oxford. They have this tutorial system as one of the top universities. So this methodology of teaching Srimad Bhagavatam through the process of reading and discussion is very powerful. It sharpens the mind, and it evokes in the children the urge to ask questions and to reason, okay? So the process that we used was, at that time they were very young, like 5 and 7. So we would sit in a circle and we would take turns reading the translations. I would pick out a story. Now they were just too young to start with Canto 1 because it's very intense, that part. So we started earlier when you're just trying to give them the taste, what Bhagavatam is like. So we started out with stories like Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj, Ganjendra's story. And then we would take turns reading the translations. And then we would stop for discussions. So this process of taking turns reading the translations only, not the purpose, is important, because every child likes to read, okay? So when they are waiting for their turn to read. So it keeps their attention focused on that. They don't get distracted because their turn is coming. Even now when I do a phone conference, over the phone I do classes for children. They're children who are 12, 13, and 15 sometimes, if their turn, if I miss calling out their name, and their turn comes, and it's their turn, they object to it and say, Mother, you forgot my name, like they get so attached to reading, and it keeps them, attentive. So that's the trick, is to have them read, take turns reading, and then we stop for discussions. Now, discussion is a very nice thing because initially, because the children don't know how to discuss and how to come out with questions of their own, you can ask those questions, okay? And it's very beneficial for parents to actually read the purports ahead of time, okay? So when you read the purports, what I do is I read the purports and then I make notes on the side, the points that I want to bring out for the children. My classes, when I do with children, is just like I would do with adults. It's practically, you actually, Bhagavatam has a nature of actually bringing in you a lot of, maturity. Like it has the ability to go deep and then to question and inquire. So, and of course you can bring it to their level. Of course, we don't take it beyond that level. But it keeps, each time you read with them, if you read it again, then they'll actually come out with, you can go deeper. And I did that with my grandson, When he was 4, I was reading at his level, trying to explain all the stories to him. It was mainly a story time, right? And then as he got older, those very same stories, we were going deeper and deeper. So each time it becomes deeper, like that. And so, and during the discussion, we would bring it to practical things, things that was happening around us, people's the problems we may be facing. Somehow it all worked itself in. Like I never had to think about it. I never had to prepare anything that these are the questions I'm going to ask, or I would just look at the purport and think of the points I may want to. And generally it never worked like that. I would spontaneously come out with things, like things in the house that was happening that we were struggling with, things in the world, like invariably you hear about things, right? Things going on in the Middle East, things, terrorism or things going on. And these things you can bring out, reflections, of what's going on and why it's going on, right? For example, you read Prahlad's story of Hiranyakashipu's terrorism, practically, right? The way he behaved and how he's, killed everybody, all the brahmanas, and terrorized practically everybody, right? So we can connect that with today's situation, right? So all these stories are very timeless. You can connect them to what's happening practically in your life, right? Every story practically, Vritasura story, how Indra's pride, his pride in his wealth and opulence, and how we don't look at each other, on basis of body, how we see and we tend to make a judgment because this person is coming from a not so good family or whatever. We tend to make a judgment, especially if you're preaching in this country, right? We see people, involved in all kinds of things. So we learn those things. How Vritasura, even though being such a big demon, he was such a great devotee. And actually Krishna, even though externally it appeared that he's helping him, he's actually helping Vritasura. He's on his side, taking him back to Godhead, So many things, all these deeper things we can understand during the discussion, And that helps if you read the purpose ahead of time, get a little time to reflect on your own, and then you bring those things. So this is like character formation, right? We are teaching our children so many things, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, about those things. Reflection, discussion, and then of course we summarize, where we actually ask the children to give their own realizations on a story, right? To give their own realization on the story. So go to the next one. Oh, this one. Huh? Yeah. Oh, no, I'll just go this way. Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about how during those discussions, we have such a chance to create a revolution in the hearts of our children, right? Because of the fact that no other process allows us to do that, right? We go to school, and I remember going to convent, and we used to have the first class we used to have was a moral science class. And we would have, it was a Christian school, right? A convent school. And so they would have these books on moral science, and they would have, I remember reading all those things about honor your father and mother, be good to your neighbor. And we were just like, it was a time we had to get, pass through it, I remember that it didn't make such a big lasting impression in our lives, It is something that we had to inculcate some way, in our own lives through examples and all those things. But I remember when we used to read Bhagavatam, it was such a big impact. These same things like character, formation was such a big, important thing. They were grasping through that. For example, in Dhruva's story, we see how Dhruva Maharaj is being so grateful, so grateful to his mother, right? Because his mother told him to, the story of Dhruva Maharaj, everybody knows that? Yeah? Everybody has read that story? Yeah. So this child is only 5 years old. This king Uttanapad had two wives, and one was Suruchi and one was Suniti. And Suniti was not such a favorite wife of Uttanapad, of King Uttanapad. So she had a son called Dhruva, and he was not the favorite son of the king. So one day, while the king was sitting on his throne, Dhruva wanted to climb on the lap of his father because his half-brother was already on the lap of his father. And Suruchi, the favorite queen, she was very, very mean and very harsh, and she chastised him and said, "You can't sit on the lap of your father because you're not qualified, and you can't actually become king either because you're not qualified, because you have not been born from my womb, from my womb. So therefore, you're not qualified." So in other words, she was wishing him death. You die, okay? She was so envious that she was wishing him death. So I was doing this story with the children, and there are so many things that come up here, right? So many things. And then you can teach children so many things about character and about things like envy, jealousy, all those things, right? Well, so we discussed about Suruchi's behavior. What does it say about her, right? So we talked about envy and jealousy, What is the difference between envy and jealousy? It's a big difference. Prabhupada writes how jealousy is something not so heavy. Like, we are jealous of somebody if they have a beautiful car or a beautiful house. So it's not so harmful, it's harmless. Right? You're not trying to destroy that person because you are envious of that person. But envy is something harder and deeper because you really want to be in that person's shoes and you want to destroy that person. So we see Suruchi's behavior is more on the level of envy. So we talk about that. We talk between, among the children about what envy can do to her, and then we know what it did to her, the reaction she got for envy, and it pretty much brings you a lot of suffering. So then we brought in other stories also in terms of envy. So in other words, we are making comparisons with other stories, right? So we bring in the Indra's story of envy, with Asura, right? He was envious of him, of his great, and he wanted to destroy him. So in other words, we compare, we bring in other stories, and we try to compare, and then we have the king's behavior. What it say about him? He's the little child's father, and he's not able to pick up that child and put him on his lap, right? So, in other words, he forgets his religious principle as a king. How he's meant to, work on a higher principle. In fact, instead he becomes weak with the woman, right? So we talked about that, and then we talked about so many other things, right? Suruchi suffered a reaction for her offensive behavior, but not Uttanapad. Why? Okay. In other words, Suruchi was punished for her behavior she was in a forest fire. She went one day looking for her son who had died earlier. Well, a yaksha had killed him, and so she went looking for him, and she was burned in the forest fire. And so she suffered a heavy reaction, but Uttanapad didn't suffer. So why did Uttanapad not suffer? And all these things you can get in the Prabhupada's purpose, you see? So we talked about that. The reason why Uttanapad didn't suffer is because he atoned. He was so regretful of his action that day and night, he was thinking about it. He left his kingdom. He left being king, and he was lamenting, right? So in other words, we talked about how we have to learn to be sorry. Is it enough to say sorry when you do something wrong, or you actually show empathy? You actually feel atoned for what you say. So we talked about offenses, how you don't make offenses to devotees, and if you do, how do you apologize for that? So many deep things we went through this one story, and each time we go with another set of, each time I would do this story with another set of children, I had a new set of questions for them. That's how amazing it is. How Lord Chaitanya said, each time you read these stories, it's never enough. And he read it hundreds and hundreds of times, okay? And the questions that I have in this book about these are totally different from these questions that came up very recently when I did it over the phone. So I decided to make a slide for these questions. But there was a whole ton of other questions that I have, just on this story. So you can see how many things you're bringing into a child's life, and how many communication and by asking these questions and discussion, you open up a whole channel of communication with the child. The child is revealing to you so many inner thoughts and feelings that he normally would never come and talk to you about, because it evokes those kind of feelings. You become very close in your relationship with your child because you're discussing these very intimate things about, how to behave, and then of course the child comes up with so many of his own struggles. At that point, the child will come up, in terms of, because we are discussing through the medium of another person. You're not pointing a finger at that child and saying, you know what, you shouldn't be envious. Remember you were envious with your brother the other day. You're not doing things like that. You're not being critical of that. You're bringing out these qualities through a great soul, who's going to, through this Dhruva story and through personalities who have shown these qualities, and they have actually suffered due to that. They have suffered a heavy reaction to that. When I was teaching my little grandson, I remember how much effect he had when Dhruva Maharaj, in the last chapter, when he goes back to Godhead, and Prabhupada explains how he was, when he was ready to go back to Godhead, he remembered his mother, right? And that Prabhupada explains how it was after 36,000 years this happened. In other words, this discussion that he had, when his mother told him to go to the forest and try to get Krishna's help, and pray to Krishna for whatever material desires you have. Then between that time and the time he became, he left, he wanted to prepare for his leaving his body, was 36,000 years. And at that time he remembered his mother. And he said, I cannot go till my mother goes. And then he brings out the quality of gratefulness in him, how he never forgot what his mother did for him, and the quality of gratefulness. Now you try training the child on the quality of gratefulness. It's going to be very, very tough. You keep trying to tell the child, oh, you have to be grateful to me. You know how much I did for you when you were a little baby and I changed diapers and I spent sleepless nights. It's not going to make any difference, right? But you show him this quality of gratefulness through story of Dhruva Maharaj, which has a very strong, very strong impact on these things. Yeah. Maybe we can go back to 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. Yeah. So we can teach Bhagavatam as early as toddlers, by picking out storybooks, pictures. And there's a group called the Baby Bhagavatam group in the United Kingdom. And they have all these parents who come once a week. They get together and they teach Bhagavatam from Canto 1, Chapter 1. And they make it so much fun for these children. And they explain the story according to their level. And they have all the kinds of arts and crafts and sing-alongs and all these things. So Bhagavatam can be taught for children as early as that. Mostly I did it through pictures. Bhagavatam, the old set of Bhagavatam had so many pictures. We would sit there and they never seem to get tired. They keep, every day you can show them the same pictures and they like it. And they want to hear the story again and again. So let's start early with them. And they get an attraction. Next one. And then of course the 3 and 5-year-olds can grasp a lot more. They may not be able to read, but I sit with them and then I read to them directly from Prabhupada's translation, directly, and then I explain those translations. Not every one of them. From time to time I stop and I make it very creative and animated for them, and so they are able to understand the meaning. And it's amazing how much they understand. It's amazing how much they grasp, these 3 and 5-year-olds. And I'll tell you an incident that I had with my grandson is we were reading the story of Dhruva Maharaj, and we were reading that section where he was ready to go back to Godhead, and the plane from Vaikuntha had come to get him. and all these beautiful two personalities were there, and there was a beautiful description of the plane, and those, what were the names? Nanda and Sunanda, they were there. And so it was such a beautiful description. He was moved, and he said, "Oh, Daddy, I want to go back to Godhead right now." You know, he's innocent, right? And I said, "Oh, yes, this is." Yeah. Then he said, "No, but I want to go now. I want to sit in that plane and go now." He was only like 4 years old. He was really young. And then I said, "Okay, are you sure you want to go back to Godhead? Are you sure now? In other words, you want to leave your parents, your mother and father? You'll have to leave them to go on that plane." Then he started thinking very deeply about it, and he said, "I will wait to go right now because I don't want to make the same mistake as a Jamal." You see, and the story of Ajamal I had read many months back. It wasn't something recent, and he connected the two stories. And he remembered that how Ajamal, if you remember the story of Ajamal, how when he fell down from his platform, Brahmanical platform, he did all kinds of horrible things. He brought a prostitute home, and then he did, he robbed and stole people's things just to satisfy his prostitute. So he had fallen down, and then later on when his eyes opened and he got saved by the Vishnu Dutas because he chanted the name of Narayan at the time of his death, which was the name for his younger son, but it was the potency of the holy name that saved him. Then at that time when he was saved and given another chance, and he went to go and do his meditation, then at that time he regretted very deeply that he had misbehaved with his wife and his old parents, that he had neglected. And there's lamentation there, very deep lamentation. And at that point, Prabhupada explains, how he lamented. And so he remembered that he didn't want to make that mistake. So he was so young, but you see how he can connect, how even small children can connect one story to another and actually make comparisons. So you can't, underestimate children like that. Even 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, they grasp a lot. They take things really deep. And it gets deeper and deeper as you go on, very deep. So as we are reading, we're not only just doing, all these deep things, but we can make it also, we can also address factual things, in the story, ask questions. But mostly we want them, this practice and ability to be able to think deeply. That's the whole purpose of Bhagavatam, to be able to critically think everything, not to take everything blindly. We are training them for something very big later on. When life becomes very tough and you have to, when there's pressure of trying to accept things from others, to accept things that are not very good for you, at that time, this kind of critical thinking will come in very handy. Because this training from the Bhagavatam will make them think twice about accepting things that are detrimental for them. When they go to college and they are given, things that are, impersonalist or Mayavadi or atheist, then they are going to think about that because of this training. Ab tum bolo. Tum karo.
So one of the things I want to highlight from what my mother is saying is that it's so important that this process of reading together be a conversation where questions are being asked initially by the parents to the children, but eventually or very quickly we will see that the children come up with their own questions to ask the parents. And when it becomes a process of conversation, then it helps strengthen the mind and the intelligence of the child. We don't want to turn this into some kind of an oral examination. Okay, now we've read the story. So can you remember what was the name of Dhruva's stepmother? Okay, can you tell me now what was the name of his mother? And like that. And we often have this tendency to turn things into kind of a memorization examination. But the whole idea is to develop conversation and thinking ability. As my mother was saying a minute ago, this process of tutorial teaching, that is where a teacher and a student participate in conversation
almost as equals, but with the idea of eliciting good thoughts and ideas through a process of conversation, is something that is tried and tested and very, very effective. It's actually a traditional mode of teaching that has been practiced in cultures all over the world. Even here in the United States, the one-room schoolhouse with a teacher and students of different ages, and the personal relationships built as a result. So by engaging in that process, the children develop very strong thinking skills, reasoning skills, argumentation. It's very nice, for example, while reading with the kids, to present some kind of a counter argument, some devil's advocate. Prabhupada used to do this a lot with his disciples, and it sharpens the mind. My younger one just turned 5 years old, for example, and we were discussing something together, and I said, okay, you're 5 now, Dhruva was 5, it's time for you to leave for the forest and go find Krishna. And he, for a minute, he was like, very surprised and a little shocked, because this is what we have to do. But then he came up with a counter argument, right? Very quickly. He said, well, yeah, but that's because Uttanapad was not a devotee. His father was not a devotee, and he was not very nice, and you're a devotee, right? So, well, yeah, okay. So he's just 5, but as they grow older, then these discussions and debates can become deeper, and it's very nice to play the devil's advocate, and they'll learn from that, and eventually they will come up with also deep questions and discussion to complicate the matter. And sometimes we may not know the answer to the question they ask, but that's okay. What we do is we say, I don't know, let's look in the purport. And you'll find that Prabhupada, he always in the purport, he anticipates what question we have, and it'll be there, right? And in this way, it becomes a natural transition from reading the verses into reading the purports as well as they grow older. These critical thinking skills are so valuable in today's world. If you go to any employer these days, then what they tell you is that they're not looking for people with tons and tons of information, because frankly, we live in a world where there's plenty of information available, and the data can be mined for exactly what we need. What we need is people who are able to interpret that data, think critically, evaluate the problem, and find solutions to them. And that thinking process, those so-called soft skills, are what people are looking for. This is what colleges and universities try to instill and cultivate within their students. This is what employers are looking for after they graduate. And so that's precisely the type of skills that we get from studying Srimad Bhagavatam, and specifically Srila Prabhupada's books. So this is an important point. I hope it came across clearly that as early as possible, it's important to get students reading directly from Srila Prabhupada's books. It's nice when they read Bhagavatam stories for little kids, and they read storybooks and things like that. Those are good. Those are beneficial. But there is a special power connected specifically with the original Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhaktivedanta purports on those Srimad Bhagavatam. These we know from our own lives, we know from the lives of countless others, and we know from the Bhagavatam's own statements that they have the ability to change people's lives. And it works like magic on children. It really does. I had a very close friend who has a child, his child when he was small used to be really, really hyperactive and always running and jumping and you know, getting into trouble, and very sweet boy. And no particular problem, just full of energy. And the parents were, you know, complaining that we can't get him to study, we can't get him to, you know, focus on anything. And I said, why don't you try studying Bhagavatam together? And they said, that would be impossible. He can't even sit still for a minute in front of the TV, what to speak of in front of the Bhagavatam. And so I said, why don't we come together and we give it a try? And I sat down with the boy, maybe he was 5 years old at the time, hadn't really started reading, but I was reading the translations for him showing him pictures in the way that my mother, and we had the book. I gave him a copy of the book. I had a copy of the book. This way, we're going, and 30 minutes later, he still doesn't want to stop. He's still into it, and the parents are amazed. They're like, what is this? What magic did you do? And the thing is, I didn't do any magic. The point is, many hundreds of children have had this experience. That connection with the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam has a magical effect on a person in the best possible sense. It makes us spiritually strong, but also intellectually very strong as well, intellectually very sharp. Sometimes, because as devotees we hear this philosophy so often, we don't realize how deep it is and how much mental power and skill, philosophical ability it takes in order to understand the philosophy. The average devotee, I mean, how many times have you heard Krishna has three energies, the internal energy, the external energy, the marginal energy. There's three aspects of Krishna, Brahman, Paramatma. It's like, oh yeah, we've heard this. But it's actually really tough. It's a philosophical stretch to think of the world as energy. This is something you learn in philosophy class, the world as energy, and the idea that it can be the transformation of someone's power, even though it's a physical substance. Even something as simple as we're not the body, which we take for granted. I remember I was at an academic conference once, and during one of the breaks between the sessions, someone sitting next to me, another professor from somewhere, he was saying, "Well, I know you're not normal. You've got that. You're different." He said, "So what do you practice? What do you believe?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Hare Krishna. I'm a devotee of Krishna, and okay, what does that mean? What are your beliefs?" I said, "Well, basically, we believe that we're not the body, we're the spirit soul, and as a spirit soul, our eternal relationship, the usual spiel." And right after the first line, he stopped me and he said, wait, what did you say? We're not the body, we're the soul? That means everything connected to the body is not really us. Our race, our nationality. Wow, that's deep, man. That's really deep. Right? And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, yeah, it is deep. I never thought of it. I'm not the body, I'm the soul. So, okay, whatever. But that is deep, right? And so we often take this for granted. We don't recognize the depth of knowledge, the mental skill, the critical thinking that's required to just understand the basics of Krishna conscious philosophy that even our children can do. And we take it for granted, and therefore we don't value it. But if we we see in the study of Srimad Bhagavatam all these skills, critical thinking, debate, communication, language, vocabulary. Prabhupada's vocabulary and his language is, like he was saying, beyond MA, PhD. Very, very difficult. I remember as a child, I was maybe 10, 11 years old. We were reading this Bhagavatam regularly, and my parents were running a vegetarian restaurant, Govinda's, in Boise, Prasadam restaurant. And our job as kids is we would spend our time in the restaurant doing our study or our work on one of the tables. And then when the customers would come, we would take them around and introduce them to the menu. This is basmati rice, and this is pakoras, and like that. Then we would take their cash at the end. And then if anyone was interested, there was a shelf of books off on the side. And if people sometimes were interested after eating prasadam for many weeks. They come and they have a look. And so whenever they would, it was our job to go over and, try to ask if they have any questions or anything. So I remember one time two young women were browsing at the counter, at the bookshelf, and they asked me some question. I can't remember what the question was, but basically I started explaining the philosophy as I understood it, And this Krishna is transcendental, and he's the supreme personality of Godhead, and chanting Hare Krishna makes us ecstatic. And I remember halfway through, she stopped and went. She went to one of them looked at the other person and said, "Hey, did you hear his vocabulary? It says Transcendental? Do you know what that word means? And it's true, isn't it? I mean, we use words like transcendental and ecstatic and Godhead and all these complicated words that are not in the average adult's vocabulary. Prabhupada's language is really, really advanced, more than MA and PhD. So language abilities become very strong. My mother used to teach us language through Bhagavatam as well. So we would read a chapter and then she would ask us questions and we would write a little summary of the story in our own words or our own realization of it. She would occasionally underline difficult words, like Krishna says in the Gita, "O scion of Bharata." And we don't know what scion was, so we underline scion and then look it up in the dictionary and discover scion means descendant or, like that. So in this way, our children can learn comprehension, language, grammar, vocabulary, all of these excellent things from Srimad Bhagavatam. And just by doing this, they will gain all the skills that are needed for a strong academic foundation for their future careers. The spiritual side my mother has just talked about. There should be no doubt about that. But even materially speaking, they will not only be as good, but they will excel beyond anything else. And it's not just my and my brother's experience. This is now the experience of many, many children around the world of different ages, boys, girls, young and older kids, and who have engaged in this process of studying Srimad Bhagavatam, and they have experienced amazing results. Amazing results. I'll end with one story. When I first went to college, I was unusually young at the time. I was around 12 years old, and it was, again, an unusual way in which we showed up there. When my parents were running the restaurant in Boise, there was a professor who used to come and eat there, and he knew about our ability, and he said, Ravi is, I think, old enough or good enough in English. Why don't you enroll him for one English writing class at the university so that he can continue with his studies? And although it was an unusual idea, I was so young at the time, but my parents thought it was a good idea because, they had kind of run out of things to do at home in terms of the English side of things, and I was good at writing, and I was writing for Back to Godhead at the time. So we got special admission from the Dean of Admissions at the university, and he gave permission to register in one entry-level English class. As it turned out, that English 101 class was full. And so the professor who had recommended me, he was the head of the English department. And so he said, why don't you register for English 102, the second semester? And I thought, this is too much. I don't think I can do it. I'm just 12. But he said, no, don't worry, you can do it. English 102 was also sold out. It was booked. And so then he said, why don't you register for English 111, which is the honors version of the English writing class? And at this point, I was getting really nervous because this is too much. As it turned out, English 111 was not being offered. It was offered every other semester. So then he registered me in English 112, the second semester honors English writing class. And I remember the first day I went into the classroom. I would never forget that day. I was so nervous, and everyone was 6, 7 years older than me. And the teacher handed out the syllabus, and the syllabus was full of the great classics of literature, the Odyssey and Iliad by Homer, and the Hamlet of Shakespeare, and Bless Me Ultima by Rudolfo Anaya, Chicano writer, and like that. Really nice classical books. And I had never read any of this stuff. All of these kids had come from high schools and they had taken, English literature and stuff. And I was really nervous. But as the semester progressed and she gave her assignments, write an essay on this chapter of the Odyssey, I went home and I read it and I thought, wow, this is really similar to Srimad Bhagavatam. The Odyssey, I don't know if you've read Homer's classics, but the Odyssey is full of, it's of kings and princes who are fighting and warring and eating and enjoying, and it's like Mahabharata, full of intrigue and activity. And I remember writing this essay on the eating habits of these kings in the Odyssey. They have banquet after banquet. And the way I got it was because we had read Chaitanya Charitamrita, and I don't know if you've read Chaitanya Charitamrita, but every chapter, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is stopping somewhere, and there's this big feast being eaten. And all the devotees get together, and they eat, and they enjoy, and then they throw some food at each other, and they have a good time, and then they go on, and then again there's a big feast. And I thought, this is like Chaitanya Charitamrita. Everyone's sitting and eating again. So I did this analysis of food habits. Hamlet is very similar to Bhagavad Gita. Hamlet's circumstances, where to be or not to be, that is the question, is basically Arjuna's dilemma. What should I do? Arjuna says, better if I were to die unarmed and unresisting on this battlefield than for me to slay the sons of Dhritarashtra, my family. And this is Hamlet's quandary. To be or not to be, that is the question. He's faced with fighting his own family that have wronged him. And so it was such a pleasure reading Hamlet. And so while other students were writing about plot and things like that, I was getting into Shakespeare's philosophical ideas and his references to reincarnation and so. And the teacher was really happy. She was really pleased by this and very impressed by the results. Right? So my point here is that Bhagavatam prepares us for any type of study that we might want to go on to do. In my case, it was in the humanities. In my brother's case, he went on to get a master's in electrical engineering. Other families who have practiced this process, they have gone, we have now like maybe 7, 8 kids who have gone on to college at 11, 12, 13 years old. There's one family in Dallas and several families in Boise and all over the United States. And every one of them has done it through the process of studying Srimad Bhagavatam. So the point is that sometimes people look at whatever we talk about and say, oh, you guys were just unusual. You were, geniuses, or you were too brilliant, or you had the ideal circumstances, or your parents are amazing, which they are. But there's so many, people think it was just unusual, right? But the reality is, what is amazing, what is unusual is Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not in the people, in the individuals. Because we have seen this work like magic in so many circumstances. If the results are directly proportionate to the investment you make in Srimad Bhagavatam. People find that even a little exposure to Srimad Bhagavatam changes their children's life, it changes their character. Even if you can't do this every day, do it at least on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. Sit down as a family together in a circle, give everyone a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam, and you read together. Okay, it's important. Everyone should have a copy as you sit around. And everyone read together, and you'll see the effects just on the weekends. If you can do it on a couple weekday evenings, very good. If you can do every day, the very best, right? So in our homeschooling process, that's the basis of our curriculum. But if you're not able to do homeschooling, then do it on the side. It will still have a powerful effect on you and your children. It will deepen, like my mother was saying, deepen the relationship between you and your children, especially as they're growing up. When the kids start to grow up, that means 10, 11, 12 years old, 13, then their minds become very sharp. They ask a lot of penetrating questions, and they need the intellectual stimulation in order to be devotees. Just dancing in kirtan, just rotating the incense is not going to satisfy them sufficiently. They need the engagement with, their intelligence needs to be satisfied. So especially as they grow older, it becomes crucial to have these open conversations through the study of Bhagavatam, to hear what they have to say, to have a genuine discussion and debate. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay. It's okay, but it's, it's really worthwhile. Actually, my mother has produced a the process is all here, and you don't need anything else to do it except Prabhupada Bhagavatam. But over the years, parents have asked a lot that, if you have some good questions that we can use for discussion on this chapter, or if you have some exercise the kids can do, some activities around it, something fun. Or do you have a curriculum? So my mother has been developing this curriculum based on Srimad Bhagavatam that you can use when studying with the kids. First, this process of sitting and discussion and debate. That's crucial. After that, then she has this curriculum. Canto 1 is complete. Canto 2 is on the way. And each chapter, you've got a chapter summary in 2 pages in language that children can understand of the main events of that chapter. Then you have higher thinking questions that you can use for discussion. There are crossword puzzles for fun, word searches, language exercises where they can practice different difficult words and grammatical concepts, all centered around that chapter of Bhagavatam. Arts and crafts activities. So there have been a number of temples using it for Sunday school. The school in Mayapur has been using it for their Shastra study curriculum in the Gurukul, and many parents have been using it individually. So afterwards, you're welcome to have a look. There's the big yellow books are the ones there that are the Bhagavatam, the first 2 volumes that are out. And then, like I said, the first canto is in 2 volumes. The second canto is now at the printers. It's or in the final editing stages, and it should be out soon. And while we're having this commercial break, the there's the other book there. It's the pink book, the smaller one, called Homeschooling Krishna's Children. That was published some years ago by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, and it's basically what we're presenting in the seminar in greater detail with more questions and examples and a systematic outline. The title is Homeschooling Krishna's Children, but it's much more than about homeschooling. It's basically a book on Krishna conscious parenting. So all the various aspects of creating the good home environment, how to help your children academically, what subjects are more important than others, things that we don't have time to really talk about in this seminar. Troubleshooting and problems with education, with discipline, with things like that, frequently asked questions. It's all there. It's a really, really nice book with a lot of practical examples. And so those we also have available here for a low price, especially for all of you. So please let us know if you're interested in. The Bhagavatam books are for display. I believe this Shatarupa Mataji here at the temple has ordered a case of the Bhagavatam curriculum. So those are available, will be available to you here eventually. I mean, they're being shipped right now. They didn't get here in time. But the homeschooling books are available at this point only through us. And so we brought copies of that. So the big Bhagavatam books are now available through Torchlight. They're publishing that. But the pink books were published by BBT, and now they're available in the United States only through my mother. So that's why we brought copies of them with us. And if anyone would like a copy, just let us know after the seminar today. And we'll be happy to give you one. Okay, so at this point, we will pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments, especially connected to Bhagavatam study, if you do.
Important. So you're reading translations as is, even though the translation sometimes can be difficult for children to understand, but you're reading them as is and then explaining it. When do the purports come into effect?
later, once the children become. So it's a good question. In the beginning, we read translations. Even the translations can be difficult, but in our experience, 6-year-old children can start to read them with practice. And one of the amazing side effects is that their English ability, reading ability, just skyrockets. Very, very good. But they're motivated to do it, and they want to do it like everyone else is. So they'll put in the effort, and with a little bit of effort, we have seen many examples. Basically, children of 6, 7 years old can read the original translations. The purports come later as the kids develop deeper questions and questions that are, that are more penetrating. Then at that point, then they and the parents are naturally motivated to find more answers. And at that point, moving to the purports is natural. But the parents can read the purports in advance and then summarize the key points and ideas for the kids as they're reading the translation.
Basically, the parents are doing that job of reading the purports and bringing it to the children. In other words, really, I mean, if you do a real good session, practically the child gets everything. That's given in the introduction, the method of how to use the book, that you have to do that process first and then use that book.
This was actually one of our biggest worries in producing these books, is that we were worried that people would see it as a substitute for actual study of Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, when this is meant to be an aid to that study, right? So it's, I mean, okay, any exposure to Bhagavatam is good, so even if people use it independently, it's nice. But the full effect that we're looking for does not come just by reading this book, right? So it's crucial that people read the introduction on how to use the book and then use it in that way. Otherwise, the effect is not as much.
When facilitating these discussions, how do you accommodate if there's a large age range in the children? So the 5 or 6-year-old may have a certain level of comprehension, but if there's a 12, 13-year-old in that same group, do you suggest even within the same family separate discussion groups, or how would you recommend handling that?
Well, I've tried a group. In Boise, we had a group like that, where there was an age range of all the way from 4 years old to like 11. And the way I was doing it, we were doing the story of Prahlad. And we had them reading, except the 4-year-olds. They were reading once in a while, just to encourage them. And then I would ask questions to each one of them according to their level. There were a few whose level was almost the same. So this way, everybody got a chance to respond to those questions. And the younger ones, even though they could not respond as much, they were benefiting just from hearing the older ones speak. And the older ones were giving their realizations, and it was really we would do for 1 hour, and they would hardly notice the time. So it can be done in a group as long as the mother or father knows, how to maneuver the, different questions. And it's not very difficult, once you read the purports and everything ahead of time, like that.
It's like when you see one of the children getting distracted, then you turn towards them and move the conversation to a level that they can understand. And then for some time, you have a more difficult conversation with the older one, and like this, you can keep everyone's attention going. And what's interesting is that the younger kids will listen to the older ones speaking with a lot more attention than they'll listen to their parents speaking. So this is, like my younger one, he adores his older brother. His older brother is like a demigod. And so he says something, he's like, oh, okay. And then he wants to participate, like he wants his share in it too. So he'll say something to kind of, because he wants to say it. And of course it won't be at the level of his older brother, but it's a good contribution, and he feels part of the discussion too. So In a family situation, it's really nice for the family to do it together because it creates a good family dynamic too. In a schoolroom setting, then you may want to divide it up more. If you have more kids who are 12 and many who are 5, then you may want to divide it up so that everyone feels more satisfied. And there's too many. But in the house situation, I think with just a couple kids or 3 kids, it's nice to do it all together if we can.
School situation, something that has worked well for me is, the 4-year-olds have coloring to do. So they have their hands engaged while the 11, 12, 13-year-olds are able to participate more in the discussion. So,
Yeah, that's a very important point. Thank you, Radhika, for reminding me, because the way the children get fidgety, they have to physically be active also, like they won't sit in one place. You can never expect that from children. So they are given, like she said, coloring, but they have their ears open, you see. So their body is busy, their hands are busy, but their ears, they are listening. And it's amazing how much they can grasp while you are doing this. So you keep them busy like that, okay? And I did that with children, younger children, and it works really well. Sometimes they're even playing with toys, and I let them play with toys for sometimes I've tested, I could do as much as an hour and a half Bhagavatam with them while they play with something. And you have to make sure those toys are not noisy, because then that'll overpower your noise, your voice. And so they have to play with soft things. And they go on, and they play, and they're hearing. Because you ask a question, you can't just be speaking. So you will be interacting. You expect them to interact, so you check on that by asking them a question, or you go deep into something, and immediately they come with the right answer. So they're hearing, and then you keep stressing that fact. Are you hearing? Is your ears open? And they'll show me, yeah, it's open, like that. So you have to do all these tricks. The idea is to try to get them as much Bhagavatam in their ears as possible, and they will, the younger ones, they also benefit a lot through this. Yeah.
There were questions in the, yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you. Nice presentation. I have one question. I have one 7-year-old son. He likes to read Bhagavatam nicely. But whenever I call him, say, okay, let us read together and discuss, so he's not so much eager to do that. He wants us to read together, but only reading. He's not ready for any discussion. So, how to get that? That is one. Second thing, he was just reading. When I was reading the letter cantos, it's a little difficult to understand without explanation near the word. So that is how to make.
One thing I've noticed how children, you want to do a session in the afternoon or evening, they're tired and everything. You somehow get them there. You give them a little, something like, okay, let's do this, and after that I have a surprise for you, or something like that. You try to lure them in somehow. Because initially the mind will reject it because there's something more attractive, like doing something, playing with toys, or, just doing those kind of things. So if you get them, draw them in initially with something which is very attractive to them, like if you do this session with me, if you just come with me, then I'll give you a surprise. Then they come in. And as soon as the Bhagavatam starts at that point, immediately you see a change in them. They actually get immersed in it. And then you start, and you don't invite them in saying that, oh, come and we'll do a discussion. They're not interested in all that. You just trick them in. Say that you come and I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story. You're not telling them to do a discussion. You're just telling them a story. And then at that point, you start reading, and immediately, because Bhagavatam attracts the heart, Krishna is there, present, and you find him, then you can start talking and say, asking him, oh, what do you think this happened? And then this discussion will start like that. So make it as interesting as possible.
And then if you ask, once you lure them in, then if you ask a question or two at their level, then it's irresistible for children, right? If the question is not capturing their attention, it's because it's maybe too advanced. for the age of the child or for the capacity of the child. So you just have to pitch it at the right level, you know. So you're reading the story of Dhruva, and you say, "Oh, why is Dhruva standing on one leg? Can you stand on one leg?" Now it's a babyish question, right? But if it's at that child's level, it will help them to imagine the story and become fixed on it, and then say, "Well, I can stand on one leg. So why was he standing on one leg?" And then, "Oh, because he wants to do something difficult to show Krishna." So it's a matter of finding the right level at which the child can connect with or relate. And if those questions aren't hitting at the right level, then we have to adjust the level, usually a little bit downward, because we're used to, studying Bhagavatam at a much higher level. And so when we bring it down, the key in the questions is just to get their mind to be focused on Srimad Bhagavatam, to invest in Srimad Bhagavatam. Then everything else will come naturally. And so that's the purpose of the questions, is to just attract them to the subject matter.
Yeah, see, we could even, one time I was doing with children, reading stories from the 10th canto, and we were acting it all out. So you can change things. And we were talking about how Krishna was looking, Brahma, Vimohana, Leela, how Krishna was looking for the cows and the cowherd boys and all those things. So you can act it out. And then, so to make it different, or, the gopis and so many things, so many different types of stories. And their mind becomes very attracted. But the point is that you always have to read directly from Prabhupada's translations, because that's where the potency is, okay? Because if you tell them a story, it will last like 5 minutes. But how do you get a Bhagavatam in for 45 minutes? That's the challenge, right? And the only way it works is when we read directly from Prabhupada's books. There's something magical, like he was saying, that happens, okay? Now, in order to make them to their level, like he's saying, you may have to act out sometimes. You may have to do different things, Like the story of Putana, was, so many things could happen. I remember reading that part where, when Putana was dying, she was running and running, and there was a description of how all the trees fell down, because when she was falling down, all the trees fell down, and then Prabhupada is writing how not the trees in Vrindavan, but the trees in Mathura, because she ran all the way to Mathura and it destroyed Kamsa's garden, not the garden, and it was so funny to them, and they were hilarious, like, wow, because one would think, why would Putana get the audacity to destroy the trees and plants of his devotees, So all these things, and then her body being cut and all this wonderful aroma coming. But look at what they're learning. They're learning that how Krishna is protecting his devotees. No matter what, nothing can harm his devotees. It will always be the demons who are going to suffer. So all these things, you're thinking it's a story, but actually you're going so much deeper, and the child is picking in so much, and that's because you're reading directly from his books. Only Prabhupada's books can give that, you see?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So this was a 3 to 5-year-old kids group that we were reading once. Prahlad Maharaj's pastime. Of course, it was not directly from Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam, but it was children's books that was published. I think it was from BBT. It has got very good pictures and stuff. So as we were passing through the story, we were at a stage where Hiranyakashipu, he was persecuting his son. And there were nice pictures, and I was showing kids those pictures and how he was against his son being a devotee. And all of a sudden, one kid, she was older among the group, she was 5 years old at that time, and then she says, but why? Why is he persecuting his son? So I explained he's a demon and it's not nice. And he's envious towards his son because he's a devotee. That's why he's persecuting. I thought she was satisfied, and we moved some more, so that process continued. But she was not satisfied. She kept saying, why? And then took me a while to understand. She could not fathom a father being so cruel to his or her own child. Um, at the same time, my daughter was there in the group too, and she was perfectly fine. she was okay with all that. But the other kid, she could not understand how one's own father could do something like that. And it took me a while to readjust and explain. It was very challenging. Any thoughts on that? I see that same thing with Dhruv Maharaj. His father kind of slights his son. Most kids' stories are like that from Srimad Bhagavatam. And as a father explaining those stories to my kid, I sometimes feel uncomfortable. I don't know how mothers feel, but it's sometimes challenging when those questions come up and like, why a father is doing something like that? And I don't know. I don't know if I should be happy if my child didn't ask that question. I should be sad that she was okay with it. But either way, it was tricky.
It's a nice question. Actually, I remember when Chaitanya was very small, I think maybe 3 years old or 3.5, something like that. So we would sit down with Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, and I would, somehow he liked the sound of verses. So I would read a line, and then he would try to repeat in his own broken way. And then we'd repeat again, and then I'd read the translation. But we focus on the pictures. And we'd go through the story of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad. And so then at one time I asked him, I said, so why is Hiranyakashipu a demon? I asked him, what makes him a demon? And I was thinking of so many possibilities. And his response was, because he pushed Prahlad off of his lap. And you remember that picture of, I don't know if you've seen, of Prahlad Maharaj sitting on, and there's that moment where he says, what did you learn in school? And then he says, Shravanam Kirtanam, and he becomes so angry, pushes, and there's this picture of him falling out. And for him, that was the moment, that was the confirmation that he must be a demon. Right? Now, how could you do this? Like, how could a father do this? Because for the child, the mother or the father's lap is like their own private real estate. It belongs to them, and they get offended. If you ever take, I remember one time it happened during a class, Purushottam came and sat on my lap, and I picked him up and put him on the side. And he was looking up at, like, he was younger, like, how could you do this to me? This is like, I mean, it's horrible. So for him, so it's interesting, you know, children will imbibe the story in their own way. They'll make it their own. And for Chaitanya, it was this moment of Hiranyakashipu pushing Prahlad off of his lap. That was the confirmation that he was a demon. Everything after that was understandable, you know, putting him in a pit of snakes and throwing him off a cliff. After all, if you throw your child off your lap, this is what you're going to do, right? So how children imbibe it and what they make of it, they'll do it in a different way. But the fact that your daughter is good with the fact that, oh, a father can do something like this, is actually shows a lot of maturity. Because in the material world, this is one of the nice things we get from Srimad Bhagavatam, is that children encounter the material world in a very real way, right? But in a protected way. They see that Krishna is there, even that this world can be full of very horrible and bad fathers, right? And mothers and family and so on. It's true, the world is like that. You know, you see, they read about in their biology book about snakes that eat their own children. And they have a point of reference. They understand that the world is like that sometimes. But Krishna is there to protect his devotee, right? So they always feel safe. And so many times people worry about the content of Bhagavatam, whether it's appropriate for kids or not. Sometimes there's a lot of very racy things in Bhagavatam as well. If you read from cover to cover, then there's, you know, in the story of King Puranjana, there's all kinds of discussion of the lusty dealings between Puranjana and his queen, and the descriptions of the physical body of women and men in great detail. And I remember reading with my mother, and we were all feeling really awkward, and what is this? And you know, just old enough to kind of understand what's going on, but not fully. And the reality is that, I mean, even in school, they give kids sex education, right? I mean, we live in a world where children will learn about this stuff sooner or later, and in our world today, sooner rather than later. They grow up, children today mature intellectually, emotionally, they mature a lot faster than in the past. And even physically, they're maturing faster. And so they're going to encounter this stuff. Isn't it better that they get it through the pages of Bhagavatam, where they see the mad lust between Kashyapa and Diti, and yet they see the consequences of relationships that are based on just lust without religious principles involved. They give birth to Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, these great demons. Right? At the same time, they know of the benefits of positive lust, of lust that is within the framework of religious principles, like Kardama Muni and Devahuti. If you read that chapter, there's endless discussion of their various forms of sense enjoyment. But the result is very nice. The Lord himself appears as their son, as Kashyapam, as Kapila Muni, right? He comes. So they see the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, but in the context of proper vision, of Shastra Chakshu. And so it's the best way to introduce our kids to bad fathers and you know, cunning, deceptive mothers like Putana, right? It's the and sex life and violence. If you see the amount of violence present in Bhagavatam, I mean, this chapter on Parashuram is like there were rivers of blood with severed hands and heads bobbing up and down in those rivers, and it's like the Bhagavatam is just enjoying describing all this gruesome, and it satisfies some element of the human nature, of the human psyche. We have this in us. That's why horror movies are so popular. This is why boys all over the world like violent games, is because we've got this tendency in us. Most of the time it's under control and it's fine. But better we satisfy this desire through Bhagavatam. Right? Every little boy who wants warfare and fighting and punching and shoving and blood and gore can satisfy their desire through Bhagavatam. Every little girl who wants a beautiful picture of how the world is, and you know, everyone's needs and desires can be satisfied through the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. And much better to get it there than through anywhere else, because they'll be protected. Now, if you are truly worried about the perception of fathers in Bhagavatam, then I would just change the story. Go to Rishabdev, for example. A very nice account of how such an ideal, wonderful father. The story of Vasudev and how he practically is ready to give his life to protect the mother and the son. There's many, many nice stories of good fathers in Bhagavatam. So you can do those stories and let the mother do the stories with the bad fathers.
One thing as I have done these stories with the children, initially when they get their first dose of something like this, they're shocked. You should see their faces. It's really shocked, like that girl. But as they read more, like your daughter, I mean, they get mature. And now, after years of reading, I mean, all these things are like part of part of life. And they are able to see everything, you know, in context. Okay, this is the material world, and this, how in the spiritual world, there's nothing like this. There's no such thing existing. And then they start to appreciate more and more the spiritual, you see? So all this about the material degradation and all this is important for them to actually see, because how will they then strive for the better, you see? So it's not like we just pick out the good things. No, Bhagavatam, anything in the Bhagavatam is just perfect for them, okay?
And in relation to the violence, one more point is that, you know, the children realize that, oh, all this fighting and killing of demons happens. But the point is, Krishna is there, so I don't have to kill those demons, right? Krishna will kill them. In Vrindavan, only Krishna and Balaram kill demons. None of the cowherd boys or the gopis have to worry. They just go to Krishna for protection. Whereas, so as you read violence in Bhagavatam, you become more non-violent as an individual. Whereas when you see violence in movies and video games, then you become desensitized to violence and you become violent yourself, right? So this is the difference in exposure to Bhagavatam, is that devotees aren't going around killing and punching people and hurting people. They're going to Krishna for protection, and they have the faith, Krishna will protect me. And that's a source of great security for a little child, right? That Krishna is always there to protect you.
You know, people in India their parents have so much of a fear that when children start reading books like Bhagavatam, they're just going to forget about their duty, material duties, of growing up, become responsible grahastas and all these things. But it just does the opposite, because reading the Bhagavatam really makes you in tune with material life, where you actually get a sense of, of the duties of, because we see that, right, in the stories of great kings and Yudhishthir and Parikshit Maharaj, they all did their duty. But then how did they do their duty? That's the point, with Krishna in the center. It's very, very balanced. It's not true.
Mataji, my understanding is that you read a chapter a day so that children get a sense of accomplishment. And we also discussed that this is a very detailed method, so asking a lot of questions, that's the essence. So, I mean, you were actually able to cover a chapter a day with so much discussion and so much.
Well, it depends on the age of the child, if you're going to create that. It takes time. Like initially, when you start out, the time is going to be shorter. But as you develop that attraction in them, the attraction to want to discuss and be, they'll get so attracted to the stories that you will be gradually increasing the amount of time that you spend with them. So, yeah, you will be gradually, in a loving way, you will be pushing more and more towards extending the time, you see? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's important to, it's important, depending on the size of the chapters, right? So what I would do is, like some days would be longer because the chapter was longer, and some days it would be shorter because the chapter, but also it's important to keep moving. In other words, you don't want to get bogged down in too much discussion. And sometimes parents get confused. They feel like every 2 verses you have to stop for discussion. No, you have to keep moving because there will be sections where there's nothing much of their interest to discuss, okay? Yeah.
Mataji, I heard that depending on the age group, some things have to be done. Like I heard Ramayana should be taught for the age group of 5 to 7, and then Bhagavatam stories. Is that something?
Yes, you can teach Ramayana, and but Bhagavatam can be introduced as well.
Both at the same time.
Yeah.
At any age group.
Yeah, any age group. Yeah. Bhagavad Gita is harder. Very early, it's a little harder, but starting 7, I think Bhagavad Gita is okay.
Ramayana, do you have any references where we can teach Ramayana in deeper? Because my daughter is more, she enjoys Ramayana. I mean, she enjoys that other Bhagavatam stories too, but but do you have anything in mind about Ramayana, for which reference we can take?
The ninth canto is Ramayana. So you can do ninth canto of Bhagavatam for getting the Ram story, to teach the children Ram story. I would try to focus on the Bhagavatam more. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
The advantage of Bhagavatam is that we have Prabhupada's translation in his purport. And so we can do it under proper guidance. With Ramayana, we don't have that privilege, So it's Ramayana, of course, every child loves Ram's story and Hanuman and all of that. So those stories, we should tell them a lot. But in terms of their study, Bhagavatam is what to study. So you tell them Ramayana stories anytime they want, and they can tell you Ramayana stories, and they can act them out in plays and in their own free time. But when it comes to study, then we need a textbook, and textbook is Bhagavatam, because that Prabhupada has given us to study. So before we move on, I want to just include a couple of points about other subjects that we don't have a slide in this particular presentation, but this has to do with, we've been emphasizing the study of Bhagavatam on the academic side. There are, of course, many different academic studies, subjects that children need to study and do well on. And since this seminar is not directed particularly towards homeschoolers, then the assumption is that they will be getting those subjects in school as they do their studies. However, there's always room for parents to emphasize certain subjects over the others. And in our fuller seminar, what we discuss is that the most important ones to do with children, for them to gather as they're growing up, are what we call the 5 R's. And they involve reading, writing, arithmetic, which is not exactly an R because it starts with an A, but reading, writing, arithmetic, rote, and raga, or music. So these 5, particularly on the academic side, reading, writing, and arithmetic, reading, writing, and math, these 3 are the most important. Frankly speaking, when children come into the university level, what we're looking for is for them to be good at reading, good at understanding, comprehending what they read, to be able to understand, follow it, be able to communicate themselves in writing and speaking well, and be good at their math skills. Everything else we can teach them in college. It's just geography, history, philosophy, English literature, chemistry, science, physics. All of this can be taught with just one course in one semester. But if children don't come with the basic skills of effective communication, effective reading, and effective math skills, quantitative skills, everything else is impossible to teach them. We struggle to teach those skills to students, and we can't even get beyond the basic skills to actually teach them the more difficult college level subjects. So those 3 subjects academically, sometimes we worry about so many different subjects that our children have to learn. But frankly speaking, if they're good at those 3 things, truly comprehending what they're reading and writing and their math abilities, then everything else can wait until they get a little bit older. That is, 12, 13 years old, and you can gradually start introducing the other subjects. That's for academics. And then there's a couple of other subjects that help strengthen the mind and round out a child, life and personality. The 4th is raga, or music. And this is something that we sometimes underestimate, and particularly if we're of Indian background, we have this tendency to push really, really hard our children in the academic subjects, and everything else, the arts, are considered to be, more or less a waste of time, but necessary if a child is interested in it. But far from that, the cultivation of musical abilities and skills, it broadens the mind, both for the academic side, but more importantly, to round out a child's life so that they can grow up to be balanced and happy individuals. When we just emphasize the intellectual subjects, it makes us stilted. It makes us imbalanced on one side because we're just doing intellectual work. Whereas music allows every person to express themselves in a deeper, more emotionally rich way. Even if they're not great musicians, it doesn't have to be that case. I remember when I was doing my PhD, sometimes there were times which were really, really intense, and I couldn't figure out what to do, what step next to take in my research, and things were just going downhill. And the best medicine was to go to the temple room, sit down with a harmonium or mridanga, and just sing. Sing the Shat Goswami Ashtaka or some other nice prayer, and just sing. And it just allowed an ability to express yourself, express your devotion, pray to the Lord, feel good, and be in touch with one's emotional side as well. Too much in India today, we're producing really lopsided people, individuals. And I recently gave a tour of, this is a few years ago now, lectures at different IITs and other good institutions around India. And professors were coming to me and saying, we desperately need the humanities and the arts here. Our students are going crazy. They study like mad trying to get into IIT. And then if they make it, if they're in the 0.0001% of people who actually make it and pass the exams after all that tuition and stuff, then they come here and they just flip out because the pressure is too much and it's too intense. So raga or music is very important. And this is why this process that Prabhupada has given us is so complete, of doing Hari Kirtan, doing japa meditation, studying Srimad Bhagavatam. It gives us everything we need, the intellectual side, the emotional side. If we dance in Kirtan, we get the physical side and beat the mridanga really loudly, right? Everything happens in this yoga process. And finally, the fifth one is rote or memorization. This is something that is out of fashion these days in the American educational system because there was a time where memorization was how you taught somebody. Learn the times tables all the way to 12 and then do this and do that, memorize with these formulas. And the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction, where we teach people reasoning and critical thinking and not memorization. Those are all important skills, but memorization, rote, still has a very important place in a child's life. The mind is so strong and so supple and so powerful at a young age that if we don't use its memorization abilities, it's a great loss for that child, for that future. The memory is so strong that practically you can learn something just by hearing it a couple of times. Up to the age of like 12, 13, it's really easy to memorize stuff. And this is especially true in the case of strengthening our memories. We can do this by learning verses, teaching our children verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, from Bhagavad Gita especially. Bhagavatam is difficult, but Bhagavad Gita, very nice. And those verses they remember now as children, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they will never ever forget in their whole life. When we were kids, we were learning these verses from Gita, the 108 important verses, and we never got to the end of the 108 as kids. But the verses we learned, I cannot forget them no matter what I do, right? The verses I've learned as an adult, I forget them. If I don't use them and if I don't review them, I forget them. And so how did it begin? But the ones I learned as a kid, in my elementary school, I cannot forget. Right? It's just like how many nursery rhymes do you remember as kids? All these little, Mary had a little lamb, or whatever you learned, if it was back in India or wherever. You learn these nursery rhymes, right? And you remember all of them. Now, why? Why? Is it because you really value those nursery rhymes as important parts of your life? No. Do you revise them regularly? No. It's just because you learn them at the right time. So imagine what a gift we are giving to our children if we give them Bhagavad Gita to learn at that time. Unlike the nursery rhymes, which are useless after a certain age, then, in fact, they've done studies. Most nursery rhymes are racist or they come from really bad incidents in history, right? Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies. Actually, is a very happy rhyme talking about the Black Plague, the bubonic plague in Europe, where everyone was dying. We all fall down, everyone is dying, right? And pocket full of posies, they believe these flowers called posies could protect you from getting the plague. So it's actually a really sad song, but we sing it for fun. So practically every nursery rhyme is like this. Ba ba, black sheep, have you any wool? Is all connected with slavery. And one for my master, one for my dame, and one for the little boy who lives down the lane. Black sheep, this is the slave. And it goes on and on. So nursery rhymes are useless, right? Practically speaking. But if we give them Bhagavad Gita early on, the verses, they will have them for life. And you never know when that'll be useful, right? If you fill their mind with Krishna early on, even if they grow up and they decide they don't want to be devotees as adults, they will never lose, they cannot get rid of some Krishna consciousness. Always, it will be there. And you never know when it will be useful. How many times are we going about our day-to-day life and we remember some old filmy song we had learned years ago, right? It just pops in your head. And what can you do? It's not even you want it, but it's there. So that's what we're giving our children, but it's Krishna. At some point in life, they'll be going through something, and matras, parashas, tukonteya, it'll just pop in their mind. Oh, Krishna says we have to tolerate the miseries of happiness and distress that come our way. So memorization is really good. And for young boys and girls, there is no limit to what they can memorize. Just a few times they hear a verse and they can memorize it. That's how sharp and amazing the memory is, the intelligence is at that young age. There is no known limit to the size of the human mind, of the human memory. We say sometimes, oh, I learned too much, my brain is full. But my brain is never full. It's just tired, but it's not full. So they can learn 1,000 verses if they want to. It's that good at an early age. Okay, so it's 4:20. Our concluding time is 4:30. It's a 2-hour session for the second one. So we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule. We can conclude here, or we can make a beginning on the third section. It's kind of up to you, whatever you like. The third section is purity is the force, and the long-term plan is to, the original plan was to do this tomorrow morning for the third session. Sorry, preaching is the, what did I say? Oh, preaching is the essence, is the third section. And so the plan was to do that tomorrow morning for the third and final session. So if you're feeling a little tired and lethargic, we can conclude here. Otherwise, we can. Okay, so yes. So my mother is suggesting that we conclude here, which means that if anyone has any last questions for the next 8 or 9 minutes, we can take those, and then at 4:30 we conclude for the day.
Mataji, you told initially that that Prabhu went to the school and then you had to homeschool. But can you share more about why you had to decide to homeschool? Because you said you didn't get much time to teach them Krishna conscious things. But I would like to know more about how you had to change that. Another thing is, was it not Srimad Bhagavatam, especially for me, I thought I don't know how to teach because I'm not very familiar, or I thought it's too much for me even to, because it's like a commitment. I have to do it every day for a very long time. So I thought I'm not very have that skill or efficient in doing that. So I would like to hear about that also. Did you find any challenge, or is it like any mother can do it?
Well, that's a good point you brought up, because I forgot to mention that a lot of parents feel that they are not qualified to teach Bhagavatam to their children because they haven't read before. They may not, and that was my situation. I hadn't read Bhagavatam at all. In fact, I was quite new devotee, but then I read for the first time with them. So it doesn't matter, because our understanding of Bhagavatam is going to be way ahead of the children, just for the fact that we've had so many life's experiences to put it in context and everything. So you can start when the kids start. In other words, you don't need to be, have all the Bhakti Shastri and all these, things. If you have, it's a plus, But if you don't, then it's okay. So we grow as they're growing, we learn as they're learning, because these books are very powerful. And once you start reading them, you'll develop an attraction. Right now, it seems too much. And you don't have to make it so long. You can do it short time. I would say just start. You can start. Get into it, and then you'll see.
So that, that brings, that's a good way for all the devotees, because most of us has a similar feeling. But how about the people who are not, involved in ISKCON, and how to engage them in the same process that you have gone through?
I didn't start out with so much of faith. My faith also grew as I did that. my faith also matured as I actually did the process, because initially I also thought that, okay, the spiritual side is separate and the academic side is going to be different. In other words, I have to teach them academically to get them to have good jobs and good amount of money. But then as I started doing the Bhagavatam, I realized that actually this is the process. So the faith develops as we go on. It doesn't come all at once. Krishna is testing us and we develop it. So as for people outside who are not devotees, it starts out with just a hearing and chanting, and then, for the process of hearing, they're coming to the temple, distributing Bhagavatam sets to them, creating that faith, and then. Yeah, yeah. I remember in Boise congregation, there were all these people coming who were not devotees that we were cultivating. We would do Sunday school for them. And the only thing I had for Sunday school, we would sit down with these Bhagavatam stories and introduce the children. And they were, really loved it. So that's another way is through the Sunday school. And Radhika, you're doing in St. Louis, right? The Bhagavatam with them every week. Yeah, and so these are the people who you're trying to cultivate. So you can do that.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the wonderful seminar, or at least today. My question pertains to time management. Most families today in ISKCON, either they work 2 jobs, husband, father work, or they do send them to a traditional academic institution, public school or private. They leave at 8 or 7, come back at 3, they have homework. When do you find the time to do the morning program, waking up, or at the same time, how much time do you spend doing Bhagavatam with them at nighttime? Because they do have so many other extracurricular activities. Maybe they have piano, as you said, raga is very important. Maybe they go to piano class. Maybe they have a sport that they like to do. So time is so valuable, but it's so limited, especially if they go to an academic institution, public school. Because if you're homeschooling, it's great, you got this. But to homeschool, the mother has to also be very kind of in the right set mood. It's not very easy to homeschool, to have the patience to teach your children. It takes a special mother, I think, also, a dedicated mother to also homeschool. I don't think every mother can do it.
A lot of points you brought out. So one question that I was thinking, anyway, I'll just try to remember all the points that you were saying. So I just remember that my years of homeschooling were the best years of my life, because, and I know that not everybody is, wants to do it, and that's totally understandable. But I would say that even if you have a little inclination, you can try it, because actually there's no loss. Because in America, homeschooling is very well recognized. So if you were to do it and then decide to go back to school, no loss. They'll actually put you in the next grade, because it's accepted here. So, and the trick I did was I did it in summer, because you get good 3 months off. See, so you can try it in summer, and if it works, you will know by then whether it's going to work, whether you are in that frame of mind, whether you can, do, proper. A lot of the issues are also that children don't listen, they take mothers for granted or fathers for granted, they don't listen. So all these things are there. But, I tell them that actually it takes a little time. If the thing is that you have to start with the idea, not how I'm going to homeschool, but rather I have no option. This is how I started. This is how I got my strength, because I was very nervous. So I thought, okay, I don't want them to go to school. So what is my best option? What do I do next? Okay, if you start thinking like, okay, I want to just try it out and see how it works, then naturally it's going to be hard. Okay, so I was determined not to do it, not to send them to school. So I started from that principle, and then I thought, okay, and then I realized after some point, after doing it in summer, that no matter, even if I do a little bit, they'll come ahead of school. You see, because schools are generally meant for the average. If you don't fit in the average, If you're under that, then you're pretty much, you know, left behind. And if you're above that, then you're not challenged enough. You see? So no matter what we did, they always came ahead. And that we could test it out through the annual Iowa Basic Skills exam. You know, they have the annual exams. They also have it for public schools. They have a separate one for homeschoolers. And that would show me, you know, that would be my yardstick to show my husband, because we were like check and balance for each other, you know, like, you know, he was telling me how, you know, I didn't do that. And so we kind of worked there. So then when they got their marks, then everybody was satisfied. Okay, they're doing okay. They're doing okay. So it's not very difficult to homeschool. It's actually very easy. I had an easier time, you know, materially and spiritually by homeschooling, because I was constantly worried. They went to school for 2 years, so I was always, I felt like I was working harder at that time, even though I had all that time during the day. But I was always constantly worried. Okay, today I need to make pizza, I need to make this, and I had to volunteer just to make sure everything was okay. Just so many, and going back and forth for different classes. I was putting out more energy and too much anxiety and frustration because I couldn't do the things I wanted to do. Like I said, I had a great desire to teach them different things, you know, just Shastra and music. And there was practically, it was so much hard work to change their frame of mind, you know, it was very hard because they were there for the best hours of their day, you know, the best, you know, fertile time they were there. And how much there were so many authorities you had to fight with. And I felt it was so unfair for the child. You know, you're putting them in a certain environment, and then they're coming home and they're saying, no, you be like this, you know. So again, those questions, those conflicts that I was facing, I was thinking, it's not fair. Either I do it, or, you know, of course we still have to keep trying. I'm not saying that, but for me, that was you know, a bewilderment that I tried to resolve through just homeschooling. And for me, it was relaxing because I could sleep when I wanted to. Sometimes when I got tired and wanted a nap, the kids would be, you know, doing that. They were happy. I would keep them busy. Like I never felt too overworked. You know, in fact, I enjoyed that flexibility. You know, when I could teach them, if some mornings were busy, I could teach them in the afternoon. I could go to India in fall for Karthik. You know, I really, you know, actually when I stopped homeschooling, I really missed it so much. I was going through years of like separation from that mode of life because I was always in that mode of teaching. And so I had to also grow up spiritually. You know, like I felt like, okay, I have to come up to standard. So it pulled me up. It actually helped me in my spiritual life, homeschooling. The benefits I enjoyed from homeschooling, that's why I tell people, if you have a little inclination, plunge into it. Then if you don't want it, you can go back. But at least you would have tried, if you have an inclination for doing that. You know, if you are in, like, in two minds or something, then I tell them, okay, you do it. You know? There were a lot of other questions he had, and she had another question.
Yeah.
So I forgot his other question. But,
Did you had more than one question, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the school situation.
Yeah, in the school. Oh, yes, that's practical way. I would say not to worry about long hours of doing one thing. You know, just make it short. Even a little bit helps. You know, one round, maybe japa, a short artik, you know, at home. And you'll see how you'll have to pull their consciousness away from it. You know, you have to find ways and tricks. You know, that's the hardest part I was facing when they were going to school. You know, how to bring them back, you know, into this devotional frame of mind, which is completely finished by the time they come home from school. So how to pull that back, you know? So maybe do something that really is more attractive to them. Start out with that. And then Bhagavatam, maybe cut it down, you know, like to 20 minutes, but do it. You know, not think that, you know, the problem we have as parents is that we put so much emphasis on the academic side, you know, on being so up and up, you know, like on the top, that we forget this other side, you know. And actually Krishna is so amazing that he'll fill in the gap. He'll actually fill in the gap. Like if the children are spending an hour every evening in doing devotional things that you've charted out, they will, you know, Krishna will make up for that loss, you know, because Krishna is so pleased with that, you know. And my children faced that, you know, when they were going to college, then, you know, many times there would be a huge festival, you know, on that day or something, and they would have experiences like that, that something would come in the exam where, you know, they had already looked at and had notes or something, you know, and they talked about that, you know, we talked about that. So Krishna will, you know, expand the time and do things. So we have to have the faith that if you put out that time, even for children who are going to school, we put out that time, Krishna will fill in. You know, he will carry that flag.
So I was thinking, as like an older sister, my parents always say that my brother's always going to follow whatever I do. So as an older sister, I thought it'd be a good idea for me to do Bhagavatam with him, so it'd be helpful for me and for my brother at the same time. But even when I try to teach him like English or math, or just try to get his homework done, he always tried to take advantage of me, or he's always like playing around with me and always trying to fight with me and everything. So how do I, well, whenever, even while making him to do his homework or study, and also to learn Bhagavatam with him, how do I control him so he can sit down and study?
Okay. Well, this is a good test in patience for you, right? Uh, I would, like you were talking about, like how you would sit with him in maths and things like that, and he would be restless and not do those things with you. Yeah, you try something like Krishna stories or something. It probably works better, right? He probably, yeah. So start out with that and see if you can develop some kind of working situation with him where he will sit with you through Krishna stories, for example. You know, start with that and read Krishna stories to him, and he's going to get very attached to that and get very attached to you on that basis. And then from that point, by developing that, he will eventually, you know, work out everything.
Yeah, just to echo with what my mother said is that I think if you make the first couple of sessions exciting and you focus on the stories, I mean obviously he can't read the Bhagavatam directly right now, right? And so you show him the pictures, you tell him the story, you read him a few verses from the translations itself, and you make it fun or interesting. He is going to love it so much that when you tell him, let's do your math, let's do whatever, he'll say, no, let's do Bhagavatam. And then if you are taking responsibility for Bhagavatam, you can leave the responsibility for all the other subjects to your mother. I think that would be totally justified to do, because this is a really good service if you did Bhagavatam. And then the running around and getting him to do his math, I think your mother can do pretty well, because she's expert at that.
You know, a lot of people who are homeschooling now, they're, you know, for all the subjects, they're hiring tutors because they want their time with all the spiritual matters. And it's working out, you know, for them. You know, they hire a tutor and he comes and teaches all the subjects to them. And so everybody in the house is satisfied, or the kid is getting educated. And then they'll spend all their time with Bhagavatam with them, or spiritual fun things with them. Okay? So that also works for them. So, you know, like that, the same idea for Pare, you know. Leave that for school, the GATE program, right? The accelerated math and English program. They do that job really well in school. You save your time for the sweetest thing at home, because you want to develop a relationship, a real relationship with your children, okay? They shouldn't see you only like always pushing them to excel, you know? That relationship won't last too long. But the relationship you build with them as devotees, you know, with your children, is the real thing that will last. They'll always be close to you.
So let's.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. So actually I just come to the temple, I don't read books and I don't do much. This is very basic thing that I do, I come to the temple.
Louder.
Okay.
So for my kids, like I read them the other book stories, which have like, for an example, like Curious George and all. So they know like these are just the characters and they can ask questions about them. But if I read these books, I don't know how to, because they know they are just the characters. So how to make them believe like these are the real stories and I mean, how to make a difference? Like those are just the characters, and these are the real characters, and whatever is there that has actually happened in the past, and um, they should follow. They should really understand in reality. Like my daughter is 4 years old, and my son is 6 years old, and they are still young. So I don't know how to start and how to tell these things to them.
So the nice thing is that your children are very young still. So they're 4 and 6, which means they're completely yours and they're impressionable. And so at this age, you can just tell them that this is different than Harry Potter. This is different than Dora the Explorer or whatever they're watching. This is Krishna. He's the Lord. And bring him to the temple and say, see, that's Krishna. And Krishna came to earth 5,000 years ago, and his stories and his activities are here in Bhagavatam. So let's read about what Krishna says and what he does. And then they can enjoy the stories like they do any adventure story. Right? We don't need to make it a serious subject matter for them. Let them enjoy it. It's, the stories of Krishna are as exciting, they're more exciting than any other big fantasy story that children might study. Putana is 7 miles long, and Bakasura is this huge crane. And Krishna's stories are all like the child's, wonderland, basically. So let them enjoy it. But in the background, you always tell them, no, this is the real thing. Krishna is actually teaching us here. He came 5,000 years ago. And they will accept it. At the age of 4 or 6, they will develop a personal connection with Krishna and faith in Krishna that is practically stronger than our own faith at that young age.
You know, yeah, just a little example. We used to do the school programs, and we took, where we would tell them about Krishna consciousness. We'd go to these elementary schools and all. And I remember we used to take this big Krishna art book, and these were all, non-devout, people from outside. And we would take this Krishna art book, and towards the end, we would open it up for them and let them see the pictures, and we would do the stories. And Krishna would capture their hearts. And we would finish one story and they'd say, another one. And these were children, army children. So Krishna is so powerful, he's so attractive, he's going to capture their hearts. You don't need to worry about anything. You just continue to tell them these stories, and gradually, on their own, they're going to develop that attraction. Okay?
So you can get a copy of Krishna book and you can read with them. There's also children's Krishna books are there. You can read those stories for them. But it's a package. You read those stories with them, but you also come regularly to the temple and you associate with devotees here, and you yourself listen to the classes regularly. So as you become educated in the process and in the philosophy, then you'll be able to impart that same education to your children, right? So bringing them here and enrolling them in the Sunday school, for example. Bringing yourself here and listening to the class on a regular basis and participating. Then this will give you the knowledge and the strength in order to do that for them as well, right? So it's a package. We have to do this for our children, but we also have to do it for ourselves. Then we are able to give it to them better, because ultimately they will learn from our example also.
Oh, Okay. That we may cover tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do the
Homeschooling questions tomorrow. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. I have American friends who are doing homeschooling, and I went down to see what they were doing. They have this reward system where if you do this, you'll get ice cream, or you'll get that. So how did you get through something like that? I just was curious.
This is actually part of our topic for next time, for tomorrow, that involves things like discipline and reward and things like that. Will you be able to make it tomorrow to the session? You'll be here? Okay, so better we wait for tomorrow, then we can give a lengthier answer rather than just, but it's a good question. And if we don't cover it for some reason, please remind us tomorrow, because it's a very important question. I think at this point we should conclude. It's 4:45, and we appreciate very much everyone's attention and for listening so attentively. It's a very high quality audience. My mother and I were discussing over lunch that very good questions, very attentive listeners, and we really appreciate your association here. We hope we'll see you all tomorrow for the third session, where we will cover Preaching is the Essence, looking at things like discipline and social life for the children and friends and vacations, extracurricular type activities. And then after that, we will have a longer time period for questions, especially any questions that people have over the course of the seminar or challenges with their own parenting experiences or experiences they want to share from their own background. But especially if people have homeschooling related questions. I know one devotee had today, others also have such questions, then we'll try to dedicate some time during the Q&A next time to relate to homeschooling questions, both about how and when it can be done, and also for people who are actually doing it. If there's any particular questions, then my mother is very available and happy to discuss those questions tomorrow. Okay, so that's our third and final session, and then we conclude with Sunday Feast in the evening. Thank you all again for your attention. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
jai.